Hey, this is Notser, and this is going to be a quick, detailed recap of how HE and AP function in World of Warships. High explosive explodes on contact. It has two states, penetration and non-penetration, and it's pretty much binary. Does the shell penetrate the armor? Yes, it does 30% of the maximum HE shell damage. If you're really fortunate and your HE shell penetrates the citadel, well, you get to do your maximum HE shell damage. In this instance, it is 7,300. Otherwise, I would only do 30%, which would be 2,190 with the Musashi. And obviously, a shatter is 0 damage because it failed to penetrate. You can do damage to AA gun mounts and secondaries. Anything that's in the explosive and it has low armor or low protection, it can still damage those modules. Otherwise, you're not doing HE damage to that ship's health pool if it fails to penetrate. How do I calculate the penetration force of my HE shell? Take the gun caliber, divide it by 6. For the Musashi, that would be 76.6 repeating. There are exceptions to this. The British battleship line, the German battleship line, and the German cruisers. They instead use 1/4 as their calculation. So taking a Conqueror's 457 divided by 4, I get a value of 114.25. Clearly, it's a larger value. It's in their best interest to use HE in more scenarios because it's going to be more successful. That's why Wargaming did it. There's another modifier that you could choose to use, Inertia Fuse High Explosive. This is the commander skill that you can decide to take. It's 4 points. It increases your armor penetration capacity of HE by 30%. So you would take the gun caliber, times it by 1.3, and then you would divide it by 6 or 4, depending on what line. For the Musashi, you take 460 times 1.3, divided by 6. I get a value of 99.6 repeating, which is much larger than 76.6 repeating, about 25 millimeters. Inertia Fuse High Explosive does not increase the damage you would do to a section of the ship that you already could penetrate. It merely allows you to cross the armor threshold where you would potentially shatter on those sections, and now you don't. Now you penetrate them. That's where you would potentially see the increase. Maybe a long range or a less accurate gun. Maybe it was hitting sections of the ship that had higher armor than you probably planned on hitting. Inertia Fuse could potentially help that. Inertia Fuse is really useful if you want to cross bow and stern thresholds. Specifically, 150 to 155, they benefit a ton from Inertia Fuse. It allows you to basically do damage to the bow and stern of high-tier heavy cruisers and battleships that you wouldn't previously have the opportunity to do damage to. And that's really nice. So that's why it's recommended for 150 to 155. And that's pretty much high explosive. High explosive is the bread and butter of destroyers. A lot of cruisers fire a lot of high explosive, pretty much all the time against battleships, unless you're presented with a broadside. And then we get to switch to AP. Now, AP, high explosive, armor piercing, should do more damage than your HE. Now, the degree is different. Some do 2 times, 3 times. Some do 100 more damage, 200. Destroyers don't really benefit from AP as much. There are exceptions, German AP. But for the vast majority of destroyers, you pretty much fire HE at the superstructure all the time. You could switch to AP and maybe fire at the bow and stern of your target if it's broadside, and you will find success. But generally, you're firing HE at those superstructures. Most DDs are low armored, so you can just fling HE at any section of that ship. You could also fire AP. It might overpen. Now, AP has 4 states: penetration, non-penetration, overpen, ricochet. Non-penetration and ricochet, 0 damage. Penetration, 30% of the maximum damage. Overpenetration, 10% of the maximum damage. maximum AP damage, once again, is if the AP shell goes into the citadel and it doesn't overpin. The game used to not care. The game used to say, did you enter the citadel? Yes. We don't care if the shell, exited the ship and overpinned. It used to be a citadel, so it used to do a lot more damage if you were presented with that scenario. Maybe like a cruiser, like a thinly armored cruiser. Now it overpins. So you can't just get into the citadel. You need to stay in the citadel for that 100%. Which is pretty nice, right? Obviously, big battleships love slinging AP. Predominantly, that's what they're doing. For this example, Citadel does 14,800. A penetration does 4,440. A over penetration for the Musashi does 480. And those are really different numbers, right? But the important thing, if you're considering, should I use HE or AP, is HE penetration versus AP penetration, over penetration in the Citadel. And for the vast majority of battleships, AP gives you too much of a reward to switch to HE. HE and AP are really usually close between their overpen and their overpen AP and penetration HE. So that's why most battleships and anyone who gets a chance will fire AP, because it's just worth more getting into that citadel and doing tons of damage. Now, how does it get into the citadel? Well, there are two calculations. Well, there's a lot of calculations. Basically, if you have AP and you're presented with the broadside of a target, especially battleships, equal tier battleships can basically punch right through at least the hull. And for a lot of battleships, firing on the Japanese, you can punch into the citadel if you're presented with a broadside. There's drop off over distance, velocity, shell arc, all that's important, and that's different for every ship, so I'm not going to go into that. Just know that if you're presented with a broadside, you want to aim waterline, and you're a battleship, you want to try and get into that citadel. And you will absolutely, I don't think you'll overpin a battleship. If you fire at a cruiser, the same waterline, you need to try and make sure that it's going to stick in that citadel. It might overpin. The French battleships, they overpin a ton. And the best advice is get a little bit of distance, have that shell dive down into the citadel of the cruiser, and it'll stick in the ship and it'll do full damage. Now, if you want to know what you can overmatch with AP, you take the gun caliber and you divide it by 14.3. For the Musashi, that gives me a value of 32.1678. That number is larger than the 32 millimeter bow. So therefore, my AP shell will overmatch a bow on target. There's no real reason to switch to AP because my gun caliber is so large on the Musashi and Yamato. Not the case with a lot of battleships. A lot of battleships you have to research their gun caliber versus the bow of the target you're firing at. If you're a tier 8 and you're going up against tier 6 and tier 7s, you probably can overmatch depending on if you're maybe the North Carolina and you're going up against a really old dreadnought. They probably don't have a lot of armor. They probably have 25 millimeters. So just do that calculation yourself. If you guarantee you can overmatch it, great. When you're presented with this, you can go for that bow, pretty much. The Germans have a little bit heavily armored, but everyone else is pretty much wide open with that equivalent armor for your Musashi and Yamato. However, if you're presented with a target that has a little bit of angling, please do not ricochet your shell off the side of the hull, like so many do. If you can't overmatch, please go for the superstructure. You can always do damage to the superstructure with your AP, and 10% of your AP is more than 0% of your AP. I think everyone can agree 10% is more than 0. So please do that. I see too many players just, I can overmatch. I can do it. No, you can't. If the angle is too steep, just go for the superstructure. Now, if you are a ship that is not the Musashi and you're presented with a bow-on target and they just will not stop being bow-on and you can't consistently hit the superstructure, load HE. If you have a super small gun caliber, you will probably have to fire more HE when presented with a target that has a lot of armor in between them and their vulnerable spots. So you would probably fire HE more. Destroyers fire probably 70-80% HE. Cruisers fire probably 60-50% HE, and battleships probably fire if 20% HE. If you're a British battleship, you'll fire more, but you get the idea. HE for a bow-on heavily armored target. AP for a broadside. If you are not in the best scenario for either, if you have HE and they are broadside, you do not want to hit the heavily armored belt armor. So, top of the hull, superstructure. That's where you want to hit your HE. AP, obviously, waterline. If you're presented with the bow and you have AP and you can overmatch, superstructure. If you have HE and you're presented with a bow, well, you can pretty much damage every section, unless, of course, you have a super small gun caliber. And that's how HE and AP work. Please, 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 when in doubt, go superstructure. If you're on the edge of penetrating the target, and let's face it, if you're wishing that you could penetrate the target, just fire at the superstructure, load the correct ammo for the next scenario. Maybe he's going to open up and be greedy. But please, I see way too many people ricochet off the side of battleships when they could easily just hit the superstructure. I hope everyone has a lot of success. I hope this helped someone who maybe didn't know this. Unfortunately, it's not in-game, but you can take what is in-game and apply the calculations to get a rough estimate of how successful you will be with HE or AP. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time.